Hi there, this is Carl Irwin, the Common Magician, and this is another video on the thumb tip series that we've been doing. So we've been looking mostly at relatively underused, unorthodox uses for a thumb tip. Just a regular thumb tip or one of the common varieties, be it a thumb tip that's just a kind of a regular design, a regular size, or an extra large jumbo thumb tip, which have become a little bit more popular, or the magnetic thumb tips. You have a magnet glued into the tip of it to be used for various PK kinds of effects, and we looked at some other uses for that as well. And then the last version that we looked at was the thumb writer, so the Swami gimmick thumb writer. Not a nail writer or a boon writer, but a thumb writer. It's actually a thumb tip or half of a thumb tip, a short thumb tip that has some kind of writing lead. They do make them, I think they make them in ink as well. There's even some that have as a type of metal that will write without ever wearing down. I believe they make some like that as well. But the typical pencil lead thumb writer is what we looked at. So we looked at how all of these types of thumb tips can do a lot of the same unorthodox things, plus they can be used for what they're designed for as well. Other ideas have come up throughout this on the comment section. I'll bring up a couple of those right now. One thing that wasn't discussed much with the magnetic concept, with a magnetic thumb tip, is the way in which it can be used to detect things. So if you have, for example, a coin trick, if I have a coin that is magnetic, this is an old Italian lire, and it has steel in it. It's actually got a part of the coin, as they were produced at the time, is magnetic. So this, among other coins that are made out of copper and other types of alloys that are not magnetic, this one could be sensed, say in an envelope or something like that. And if the envelopes are handled with a thumb tip, I would know which envelope this coin is in. It could also be used, of course, as we discussed, to hold back magnetic items or to remove magnetic items because of that attraction. So one other use that we didn't really talk about, another one that was brought up was using a thumb tip just as an indicator. So if you had multiple receptacles, bags or envelopes, and you threw some items into each one, if you were able to deposit a piece of a thumb tip, a small short thumb tip, or a thumb writer or something into a bag, you would be able to feel that and sense that very foreign object inside of the bag and be able to identify a particular item if they were switched around or mixed up by spectators. So really unusual ideas that have been thrown around out there that have a lot of potential, and we just scratched the surface. I'm sure there's many other ways in which you can apply the use of this bizarre foreign object, the thumb tip, well beyond the concept of vanishing a silk, right? Or some of the other more common ways that we use a thumb tip. I'll talk more about vanishing a silk on the next video, which will probably be the last one. We'll do one more video after this, which will deal with handling. But today, few-minute introduction there, just recapping where we're coming from. This video is going to talk about, we're going to discuss the fit and the visual aesthetics of your thumb tip. How does it look? Does it matter how it looks? That's what we're going to deal with. How can you manipulate it physically to work better for you? Is that even possible? So these are just some of the things we're going to talk about. A lot of this stuff is old information from people who have tried, and experimentation that's been done over the years by others and also by myself. And I'm also going to share with you quite a few of my own observations, my own perspectives, my own philosophy on this. This is how I feel about it. Hopefully you've come to my channel to just hear how I feel about something. And I will add a lot of that in here as well. Do I speak the gospel on all of this? No, but it is the gospel according to Irwin. So if you value my opinion, you're going to get it here. And I'm going to share out just my feelings on some of these items that may help you decide on what kind of thumb tip you would want to use, or whether or not it's worth using the one you have. So with that, let's talk about fit. Fit. How should your thumb tip fit? Should it be tight to the knuckle? Should it completely cover the thumb? How should it fit? I've got a bunch of thumb tips here. My collection. It's like a box of horrors. These different body parts here, thumb tips that are in there, and they're all somewhat unique. They are almost all Vernay thumb tips. So I'll say that off the bat, and I'll talk about why Vernay versus other options, because there are other options. There's other types of thumb tips, but there's a wide variety here. This is a soft thumb tip. So this is a soft kind of vinyl, and you can, compress it and kind of change its form a little bit. It's a little bit thicker. It is a little bit longer compared to the standard thumb tip, just a little bit, tiny bit, not much. I don't think I would say that it has more of a load capacity. Probably longer, just because it's just a little bit thicker. The color tone, which is something we're going to get to in a minute, is similar. There's a slight variation in color tone, but they're quite similar. On the camera, it might look like it's quite drastic, but in person, these color tones are not very different. They're quite similar. The hard plastic is probably a little bit darker. We'll talk about that, as I said, in a different segment. I don't like this one. I don't like the soft one. I think they're kind of sticky. So for billet switches paper, I find that the soft thumb tips don't work as well. The harder plastic thumb tips are a little bit more slippery. They're easier to get on and off. So first of all, for fit, softer thumb tips do tend to be a little bit sticky. Okay, so keep that in mind. Now you'll notice how this fits. It fits entirely over my thumb. Some of you will look at this and say, that's not how it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to stop here. You'll notice here on this one fits right up to the knuckle. This one, I actually have another thumb tip, an older thumb tip. It's a cheaper one, where I cut off up to the knuckle and I inserted it in there and I glued it into place. So I can put a billet in there, and it does fit up to my knuckle, and it has kind of a snug fit. So that's one way. We'll talk about size alterations here in a moment, but that's one way, is that you can put some kind of material inside. I found that using another thumb tip or a fingertip or a junior size thumb tip, my hands are a little bit skinnier and thinner, a little bit more gangly there. So that can help, right? I've got other classic size thumb tips. This is a classic size. Actually, that's a jumbo one. Here is a classic size thumb tip right here, which has a magnet in it. And this one fits over that knuckle, goes beyond it, right? If I bend my thumb, it's snug enough, but you can see that these do fit kind of large. They come off quite easily. I have to kind of bend my thumb a little bit to keep traction to hold it on there. Certainly with the jumbo ones in the size of my hands, this is a shaved down jumbo one, extra large. This goes absolutely over my thumb knuckle all the way down. This is a full-size jumbo one, very similar. It goes all the way down. My thumb rider stops at the knuckle. Because the boon is in there, it sticks pretty well, takes up space inside. This one here, just notice the color variance. This is not a Vernay. This is another off-brand. If you order a thumb tip on Amazon, just generic, you'll get something like this, right? Kind of a hard plastic. It's more like a fingertip. This is a fingertip. You can get fingertips that fit on the finger rather than on the thumb. And we're not going to talk about those uses and that kind of handling really at all on this, but that is an option out there. I actually got this to be used on my thumb because it fits quite snugly, watertight up to my knuckle. Because I was experimenting around at one time with putting a little bit of liquid into the thumb tip, putting fluid and water in there. I need to have a seal. So these are the different kinds of fits that you can have. Now, which one is right? Well, Richard Sanders put out a video. I have the DVD sitting over here from 15 some years ago, for Visibill, which was one of his handlings for the bill change. And on that, he has a bonus bill change, which is Richie's double bill change. It's also in the Switch book by John Lovick as well, is published in there. And for his bill change, the double bill change, you got to have two bills stacked on top of each other. It's quite a thick packet. He does this in the way that Richard Sanders can do. He in the video, and it just sticks in my brain. I remember seeing this the first time and just kind of nodding my head, thinking, yes, finally someone's saying it out loud. He says, people argue about how thumb tips should fit. Here's how a thumb tip should fit. And he put the tip on, and he goes, mine fits like that. Mine fits like that. That's how it should fit. It fits like that. And what he's showing is that his thumb tip, which is just, I think, was using a regular vernet, went right over his knuckle all the way on his thumb, and there was a lot of wiggle room in there. He didn't explain it. He didn't give an apology for it. He didn't make a position. He just said, mine fits like that, and that was it. And I think that's the best explanation. Mine fits like that. There is no right way. There's no right way. There's only a right way for what you intend to do with it. Okay, so I alluded to this. I have one here that I use for when I was playing around with fluid and I needed to keep liquid in there. I needed to have a payload that would hold liquid and I needed a seal. Mine fits that way for that, right? I never use this. I know I don't do that trick. But if you're going to do that, if you're going to focus on that trick and that's something you want to have up your sleeve or on your thumb, you're going to need something that seals in that way and maintains the payload. You're going to have that. So one way or the other, you're going to have to refit, which we'll talk about in a minute, or you'll have to buy something that fits the size. Otherwise, you just need something that covers the thumb that can hold whatever it is you need to hold. So mine fits this way. This is my magnetic thumb tip. It fits this way. It covers the knuckle. It goes on there. It's quite loose, comes off easy. I'll be honest with you. I find that for a lot of the things I need to do, I need to get it off. And I need it to be able to come off easily. I don't want to have to pull on it. I don't want to be sweating in there. So for me, I find that they do fit pretty loose over the thumb, over the knuckle. And they can go on all the way. And that's okay, because that's the kind of magic I do with these, right? So depends on what you're doing with it. Again, I have this one that fits to the knuckle for fluid. I have this one that's been redesigned to fit right to the knuckle. So if I do want to vanish that 6-inch silk, it holds the payload and it stops there at that spot. Rarely use it, but there it is. I can get a dollar bill in there and it will come out smoothly with that additional material that I've added to it. But anyway, that is fit. It needs to fit for whatever you're going to do with the thing. Whatever you're going to do dictates how it should fit. If you buy a thumb tip and it's like this, don't send it back. Don't write a bad review and say, it's too big. Unless, for what you intend to do with it, it is too big. And in that case, your review ought to say, it's too big for what I need to do. That's more accurate, okay? These are very generic. They're very down the middle of the road. You'll notice that all of these Vernet thumb tips, they all kind of have the same color. They're middle of the road. That's how they're designed. We'll talk about color here in a minute. But the size is middle of the road. They do make some other kinds of sizes for fingertips and ladies' thumb tips and junior size thumb tips and whatever. If you really, really want to play around with fit and you need a specific fit, you can buy something, experiment, and find something that will fit. They're not expensive. They're just a few dollars, right? You can buy a handful of the different sizes, no shipping if you're willing to take the long shipping, 5 to 10 days. And it's worth a couple bucks to get something that won't work and get something that will work, and then okay? So fit. Mine fits this way. I'm with Richard Sanders. Mine fits this way. That's how it fits. How does yours fit? I don't care, right? However you need it to fit for whatever you need to do. If you have a thumb tip that fits like this one fits, Well, mine fits this way, and I use it. So that's that. Okay. There's not a right generic answer for this. It really depends on what you're doing. So it needs to have the room either in the payload or in the pad to do what you need to do. So consider the magic you're going to do and work from there. There has been a sort of mythology around thumb tips that you can shrink them with hot water, boiling water or very hot water. And you can put the thumb tip in and you heat it up and you can wrap it in rubber bands and it will shrink if you let it sit in there. There is a very small grain of truth to that. You can put some rubber bands around it. I recommend you don't put them on too hard, but you can wrap it in just very lightly in some rubber bands, put it in some hot water. I recommend you take like a coffee cup, put some water into it, heat it up for a minute or two, so it's steamy, stick it in there. You don't want the rubber bands to be too tight because what does happen is heat does make this quite pliable. And if the rubber bands run too tight, they'll just snap off because it makes it like mushy. And you won't ruin it necessarily, but they'll just snap off and it won't really do anything. You can't really shrink this, but you can make it pliable and reform it so that when it cools down, it will have a slightly different form. And I've done that. I have a thumb tip over here that I did with that years ago. And you can see it's got kind of a weird warp to it. And it did make it so that it fit a little bit tighter to my knuckle. It did not shrink it though. You can see it just has kind of a weird ripple to it. And it's that ripple that allows this to fit. And that ripple stayed in place because of the heat that I applied to it and the way that I morphed around. I've only ever done that once or twice. It's not worth doing. But you can. If it's something you want to play around with, that is an option for Vernay type thumb tips. Other type of thumb tips I can't say, but Vernay thumb tips and their thinness and their pliability seem to react well to heat in terms of reforming it. So that is a possibility. I would recommend if you have a thumb tip and you want a tighter fit, I would say get a smaller thumb tip. And if you want to maintain the payload, you could get one of these, a bunch of these cheap thumb tips for a couple bucks. You can get like a bag of them. And you can cut off up to the knuckle and insert it into the thumb tip. Use some super glue or something, Gorilla glue I've done, and you put it in there and it will give you kind of a new internal seal. So those are possibilities that I personally have experience with that I've played around with. So that's fit. How can you manipulate it? How should it fit? There's not a hard answer to this, right? Some people out there will say there is a hard answer. I disagree. There's not a hard answer. It's going to be up to what you intend to do with it, and you have to decide for yourself. So I tend to go loose. I have no problem with them being very loose for what I do with them. If I was going to try to vanish a large silk in a large jumbo-sized thumb tip, I would need it to have some grab. I ain't doing that trick, right? But if I was, I would need it to have some grab. Otherwise, I would need to make sure that I was getting some of that silk against the pad of my thumb. So when I put it on, I would have a little bit of grip there and it wouldn't just want to fall off, maintaining all of that material inside of it. So keep that in mind. Next, we're going to talk about the color. What color should it be? How much detail should it have? These are important questions. I think there are some answers to this that some of you will agree with and some of you may not like, but I'm just going to give you my opinion on it. Before we answer that, we have to answer another question, though, is that should it be seen? If I had a nickel, for every time I heard someone tell a story about how they knew someone that had a nickel-plated thumb tip that nobody ever saw. You always hear those stories. I've never run into someone who actually has ever had one of those, right? But I've heard that story a billion times from so many people who claim to have seen that in person. I think half of them are lying, okay? The other half of them, maybe they're telling a true story about some magic shop dealer or owner that had something like that. The other story is that someone had a thumb tip that they painted, hot pink or something like that, and no one ever saw it. Is that possible? Do I believe the possibility of those stories? Yeah, sure, it's possible. There are handlings where you just never see the thumb tip. That's not what they're designed for. They're not designed for that. Okay, so here's how I would describe this. These are sensationalized claims. Every occupation has sensationalized claims. My profession really is in music. I'm a trumpet player. I went to school for music. I went to school for music education. I was a trumpet major. That's my major instrument, and I became very proficient on trumpet and paid a lot of money to become very proficient, and did the juries and all of the recitals and all those requirements, put thousands of hours into learning trumpet. And throughout my younger years as a high school student, I always heard these claims from these great professional trumpet players about how whenever you play the trumpet, there should never be any pressure on the mouthpiece. The mouthpiece should have zero pressure. You ought to be able to take that trumpet and hang it from string from the ceiling and just walk up to it and put your lips on it and play a high double C. Stratosphere Maynard Ferguson, if you know who that is, was a screaming trumpet player. You ought to be able to play these high register notes on the trumpet with no pressure. Absolutely sensationalized, bogus nonsense claim. It's not true. It's these things become sensationalized because people are very adamant about making a truthy point. Okay? The truthy point there for trumpet is that you shouldn't have much pressure. There shouldn't be much pressure. But there has to be some, or you can't seal the mouthpiece. The air won't go in, right? It'll leak out all over the place. You have to have some pressure in order to get a good seal on it, but there shouldn't be a lot of pressure. You shouldn't be cramming the thing down your throat. That's the truth. So it goes for thumb tips. Should they be seen? I'll put it this way to kind of desensationalize those claims about hot pink thumb tips and nickel-plated thumb tips, all this nonsense out there. I'm sure you know, I'm sure someone out there knows somebody that did this or does it and has firm beliefs about it. No doubt. But it's sensationalized. It's not the real truth. Here I think is what the real truth is. It is camouflage prosthetics. Like a prosthetic, like an extension of the body, right? Prosthetics is a health science where parts of body are created to replace missing parts of body on people. And the concept there is that it should be seen, right? It's designed to be, I should say, designed to be viewed, but not seen, not noticed. It should be viewed, but not seen, right? Should it be seen? Well, maybe you could say it shouldn't be seen, but should it be viewed? It's designed to be viewed. These are designed to be viewed. They're in the shape of a thumb. It's not a tube, right? If that's really the way it was, you wouldn't need a nickel-plated thumb tip. Some of the original thumb tips, as they say, were receptacles that were really just tubes. They were just cardboard tubes. They weren't in the shape of a thumb at all. And those were meant not to be viewed. But these are designed to be viewed. This is upgrade, right? These are in the shape of a thumb, and they're in the color of a thumb, which we'll get to here in a second. They're designed to be viewed, but they're not designed to be seen in that they're designed to be noticed, right? That's the essence of camouflage in prosthetics. Camouflage doesn't look like the real thing. Camouflage looks enough like the real thing that it can be in view, but not seen. It's unseen, even though it is in full view on full display, right? So that's how this works. Should it be seen? Not in the sense that it should be noticed. Should it be seen in the sense that it should be viewed? Well, it's designed to be. It is designed to be. So it can be. It can be viewed. There are ways to handle it where it can be viewed. And we'll talk about that on the next video when we get to handling. Okay, so given that, what should the color be? How should the definition of it be? How accurate, true to form, true to life should it be? Here's the thing. the color. There's often a lot of talk about color and kind of the, I don't know, the unfortunate racism of the whole thing, right? Is what's brought up. That after all this time, we don't have thumb tips. I just recently heard this comment, and I understand where it's coming from. After all this time, we don't have thumb tips that are in a multitude, that are easily accessible. Like you can buy these everywhere that are in a multitude of colors. And why does Vernay not make this kind of thing that I'm aware of? I don't think they do that I'm aware of. And they're certainly not widely available or on the market, obviously on the market. I'll point this out. This is not Vernay. Let me get this out. All of these are pretty much the same color. Okay, if you look on the video, there might be some slight variance that you can see, but in person, these are all really the same plastic. Vernay actually has taken a fairly middle road skin tone. Now, some people out there are going to say, oh, that's easy for you to say, you're a white guy, right? I understand that, but really this is darker than me, right? This is the cheapo one. This is a very white, light color. There is a sense in which this is closer to the lightest parts of my skin tone, right? Which is quite white. This is the generic thumb tip. And even this is lighter than me. This is more middle ground. It does favor kind of the lighter skin tone a little bit more, but it is more middle ground than people give it credit for. Now, let me describe my observations and experience with this concept of skin tone. There is a relatively insensitive, racist kind of meme out there about skin tone and coffee. Coffee and creamer, right? The Starbucks skin tone scale. There's something about that is cheap and offensive, probably for some people, and I understand that. But that actually comes from something, probably that meme is unaware of this, but it actually comes from a science in skin tone design that I actually saw in a science piece, a news story back in the early 90s. I just happened to see this. I remember this as a teenager. I saw a person who was working in prosthetics, and they had a kind of a growing company, and they had designed a skin tone sort of continuum that was based on this idea, right? They said, well, if you look at skin pigment, we really all share the same pigment, right? The difference is between how saturated that pigment is or how muted it is. Its prevalence versus its lack of prevalence, right? And when you consider that, if you really look at something that has a dark brown like coffee, and if you add a white to mute it, which would be like a creamer, you really do have, and he showed this on this news piece, right? And this was a reputable prosthetics manufacturer, healthcare CEO. He described the skin tone theory there using coffee and creamer. So this is actually something that does exist in skin tone theory for prosthetics. There actually is a continuum. It's a 6-part continuum, 6 different kind of stopping off points. It's called the Fitzpatrick scale. And it deals with skin tones and how they react to UV light. And if you look at the continuum, it really tracks pretty well to this concept of coffee creamer, right? That you have very high saturation of pigment versus muted continuum up until white, which there's almost a complete lack of pigmentation there. Now, obviously, as you look at your skin, you'll notice there are some reds in spots and some pinks in some places. You might even see some blues and purples actually in skin tone. That has to do with what is under the surface and blood flow, and clean blood versus dirty blood, that is being cycled through the body, arteries versus veins and capillaries and where they're at. So you're going to have this variation, but in general, if you take the general tone, you do have this continuum of brown right? That is muted or concentrated. So what Vernay has done is they've taken kind of a middle ground where you have this brown, it's a brown tone that has been muted between absolute saturation and white. And that is what they sell. And it kind of makes sense. So this is a little dark for me. It's kind of dark compared to mine. Now, you don't see it when under the lights on here, but if you're looking at it in person, it's dark for me. The way you handle it, though, and the way it should be seen, and we'll talk about handling later, it shouldn't matter. I know some people with very, very dark skin who use these exact same thumb tips because when you're looking at it in proper handling, proper usage, the tone is not apparent, right, with proper coverage and handling and this kind of direct view. And you'll even notice people that have much, much darker skin tone, when they look at the hand and the pads of the hands, it tends to lighten up a little bit, right? So there are variances there. This is middle ground, favoring a little bit more towards the lighter side, but it is kind of middle ground. That is the apologetic for their design. Okay, so think about skin tone in that respect. When you're running into skin tones, I have a Sonata gimmick that's got a lot of kind of red in it. It is a weird color. Now, in the shadow of the hand, it works okay. It's a little shiny. But in the shadow of the hand, it works okay. But it really is not quite a match for my skin tone. But it doesn't have to be. Okay. Now, can you pull your hair out trying to find one that is just the right skin tone? You can if you want to. But my view, in my experience, is that you really don't need to. Not if you're handling it properly in the right way. It can be viewed and not be seen and not be exact in the skin tone. That's my explanation for this. So plain Jane Vernay for all types of skin tone. If you are very, very, very dark, or very, very, very light, or if you have, for some reason, a very, very reddish kind of pigment, maybe you need to find something else, but I think that's very rare in the continuum of skin tones. The vast majority of us are going to fall into this being a very neutral between very dark and very light. And kind of like if you look at a paint swatch at the paint store where you have colors that are all within a family, right? All of our colors are really in the same pigment family. They're all variants of skin tone. Kind of drive this home further, my daughter has a Crayola crayon box that is called Skin Tones. And it has the variants of all this, and it really is, it's this coffee creamer thing. All of these colors really fit into that same continuum of tone, of brown being very muted or very saturated. Okay, so because it has a familial continuum connection, that alone helps it to blend. Okay, so a little bit of an apologetic on skin tone and why the plain Jane thumb tip really is universal for everybody. It's dark for me, but it's okay. It's going to be very light for some people, but it's okay. It's gonna feel off, but promise you, it's okay with the way that we handle it. Okay. Another issue is shine. Shine. How do you deal with that? Because it is plastic. Now, when you get a Vernay thumb tip, this is a newer one, it doesn't have a lot of shine to it. It's kind of got a matte finish. But after it wears down for a while, it gets kind of shiny. This one's got a bit more of a shine. You can see kind of the specular highlights. That's the word for it, specularity in the light. You can see kind of a specular highlight right there. Here's how I deal with that. You can take either a dish sponge that has kind of a coarse side to it, probably not like a Brillo pad or something like that, but a dish sponge, and you can kind of scrub it, and that helps a little bit. If you want to get a little more aggressive, these sanding blocks, these foam sanding blocks, the very, very light, this has kind of a coarse side to it, and then a very light side, the lightest kind of grit. Not sandpaper, but a sanding block, because you want it to have a little bit of a sponge and relief to it. If you very lightly brush over it, so this is a very bright shiny thumb tip. And here live for you on air in real time, I'll just kind of give this a once over. So just, I'm very lightly, I'm not taking really any material off, but very lightly going over it, and it'll get a little kind of dusty, and then what you can do is just kind of wipe that off. You can see that it improves quite significantly. Now, your skin has specular highlight, especially in places where it's more oily, right? And especially there's a Fresnel effect. It's called Fresnel, where everything really becomes reflective when it's looked at at an angle. That's where you get mirages when you have heat distortion on sand. You're looking at it at an angle, and between the refraction of the heat and the Fresnel effect of the sand, you start to see reflection. And all skin actually does that. So if I put my thumb down, you'll start to see some specular highlight because you're looking at it at a steep angle. That Fresnel effect comes in. So you just need to keep it sort of at a satin matte kind of finish. That's where you want it. You don't want it to be very shiny. So you can remedy that with just a simple light sanding block, or some kind of a dish sponge or something like that, and just wipe it off. Don't do this very often. Do it very lightly. Do it very rarely. Okay, so whenever you need to. These are cheap, right? If it really wears down and it looks bad and it looks crusty and ugly, my goodness, just a couple bucks, right? You should only be paying a couple bucks for these things. Can you buy expensive thumb tips? Yes, but I've already gone over the skin tone issue and the way that it should be viewed but not seen. Why? I mean, what kind of magic are you doing? Really, you know what? Are you doing this? Are you doing this kind of thing? If you are, I would recommend you not, do that. That's not a good use for a thumb tip. I mean, perhaps you could, but that's not how you typically use thumb tips. Thumb tips are used close up, but not that close up, and not looking at it like that. They're used like this. They're used like this, right? This is how they're used. Again, we'll talk about handling later. You just need skin tone and satin matte finish and a thumb shape, right? And a fit that fits what you're trying to do. So that's the shine kind of side of this. So that's it. That's pretty much all I have to say about how it should fit, how it should look, what you really need, the realistic kind of requirements, hard versus soft, my opinions on these, my philosophy on the skin tone issue, and where I observe this from in other people, and how the pros who work with skin tone matching, how they talk about this. So I've seen some thumb tips. There's the HD thumb tip, which is not really much more expensive, if at all, than the Vernay ones, but it's got the little cuticle kind of whitish color there on the thumb, and it's just I don't think you need that stuff. I think it's a marketing thing. I think they're selling it on the fear that you have that you need to buy this thing because someone's going to see it, right? Or that you need to fool magicians. I hate to tell you, but if you're going to be doing thumb tip handling, classic thumb tip handling, it doesn't matter what your thumb tip looks like. People are going to know you're using it as far as magicians are concerned. When we talk about handling on the next video, whenever I get to that, I will mention a couple sources where you can get some really unorthodox handling that magicians will not notice, but it's going to take some work, and it's going to take some sacrifices, much like if you think about doing sleight of hand with cards, right? There are some difficult sleights that do amazing things. There's some things you can do with thumb tips that really make them disappear. And like magicians can be fooled by people vanishing a silk using a thumb tip. It can happen. You can do it. But there's a cost. There's a price you got to pay to do that. And we'll talk about at least one particular individual who's done a lot with that kind of handling on the next video. But Vernay classic thumb tips, there's a reason why everyone buys them. There's a reason why professionals use them. There's a reason why it's the number one selling and most easily accessible marketed thumb tip, because they work really well, right? for a lot of sizes of hands and a lot of skin colors, that's probably what you want to do. So experiment if you choose, but I recommend a Vernay. I also recommend that you buy a classic and a jumbo. That's what I recommend. If you were going to get a thumb tip, I would recommend a classic, a jumbo, and I'll do one more thing. I recommend a thumb writer. All Vernay. Get some magnets if you want to. Glue in your own magnets, or you can buy the regular one with a magnet, depending on how you want to use your payload. If you need to have that payload empty, don't do that. But you can just buy neodymium magnets. And the way I fix them in there, I guess I'll mention this. You can glue them in, right? But that gets kind of messy and weird. What I do is I take the magnet and I set it down, and I take some duct tape, really good high-grade duct tape, and I cut out a circle that overlaps the magnet by maybe a centimeter around. And then I kind of cut off the top edge of it so that it's flat against the top edge of the magnet. So if this is the magnet, I would put a circle that would go around the magnet. This is kind of enlarged, and I would cut off one side. This is going to be the very frontmost part of it. I put it on a finger, I fold back the duct tape, I slide it in, I push it all the way in to the tip, and then I press down the duct tape. And it's pretty close to how they come, because what Vernay does is they send them now with a type of adhesive tape, sticky kind of gluey tape that sits over top of it. And probably the easiest copy to that you can do is just good old-fashioned duct tape, just a good sticky duct tape. You put that in there. That's what I've done with this. So you can see there's a piece of blue duct tape in there. Now it's white on the inside, so you don't see it. That's another thing about translucency of thumb tips, and I kind of miss this part when talking about color. Some of you may find that your thumb tips are like, oh, my thumb tip's see-through. I can see through it. It's going to alter the color like in very slight ways. If I put a bill in one of these, a dollar bill, I can see the dollar bill on some thumb tips that I've owned. No one sees that. Again, it's to be viewed but not seen. The camouflage, the tone, don't worry about that. You did not get a faulty thumb tip if your thumb tip comes and you can kind of see translucency to some parts of it. There's nothing wrong with your thumb tip. Everything is going to be fine. Do not panic, okay? You got a good one. It's going to work fine. Nobody's going to see that when you're using it properly. So again, handling, we'll talk about that later. But anyway, so I would recommend, these three things. If you had to get one, it's that one. That one or that one, depending on how you want to use it. If you want to have a big form, you want to do the card box under the handkerchief thing that I talked about, you're going to want that jumbo one, right? If you're just going to do kind of typical thumb tip work, you want the regular size one. Billet switches, bill switch, the bill change, that one. You could do the bill change with that one as well. If you're going to do one, it's one of those, okay? If you want to have two and you're not doing a thumb writer, get one of each. If you want to have a thumb writer, get the thumb writer. If you want to have a thumb writer and you just want to do a bill change, get the thumb writer and a regular, or a thumb writer and a jumbo. Okay, so you can find the combinations for you. But if I could only have a few, these are the ones I use. These are the ones I need, the ones I use. In 9 times out of 10, the one I'm going to carry is going to be probably the jumbo with a magnet. That'll be the one that I carry. Okay. If I'm going to carry my Vernay thumb writer, I'll probably have a regular thumb tip with it if I'm going to be doing thumb tip work. So one of those two. Okay. I wouldn't use this for most thumb tip work, but as I said, you can use your thumb writer for a lot of unorthodox uses, the coin tapping thing or whatever. Anyway, that's it. That's what I got for you in terms of philosophy on the types to use and my experience with these. So Sonata gimmicks, there's other kinds of extensions for, fingertips, other kinds of things. You can go on and on with this sort of stuff. They have kind of special handling and usage. You know, there's all kinds of different prosthetic apparatus that magicians can use to conceal things. But the thumb tip's the most popular one. So anyway, there you go. That's all I got to say about that. Good luck with that. Nice long video. I can't tell you more. It's all out there. I've put it all out there. So good luck with that. Happy magicking.